The morning sun hadn't yet appeared when Rose Lopez arrived at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. The streets were quiet, with only the occasional taxi passing by as she made her way through the employee entrance at the back of the building. She nodded to the security guard who barely looked up from his newspaper. After 15 years of arriving at the same time each morning, Rose had become as much a part of the building's routine as the sunrise itself. She stored her worn canvas bag in her small locker and changed into her gray uniform. The name tag pinned to her chest was slightly faded from years of wear. At 52, Rose moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew exactly what her day would hold. She gathered her cleaning supplies and headed toward the grand ballroom, which needed special attention before tomorrow's charity event. The hotel was just beginning to stir. A young businessman hurried through the lobby, coffee in hand. Two front desk clerks chatted softly as they prepared for the morning shift. None of them noticed Rose as she slipped past with her cleaning cart. She had perfected the art of invisibility over the years, moving through the spaces of the wealthy and privileged without drawing attention to herself. The ballroom was enormous and empty, its crystal chandeliers dimmed. Rose flipped on the lights, revealing the gleaming marble floor and ornate gold trim that framed the walls and ceiling. She took a deep breath, savoring the moment of solitude before beginning her work. These quiet moments alone in beautiful spaces were small treasures she collected throughout her workday. As she dusted the grand piano positioned near the stage area, her fingers lingered on the smooth black surface. Without thinking, she lifted the cover and gazed at the keys. Something about pianos always pulled at her heart, tugging at memories she usually kept carefully tucked away. Rose glanced around to make sure she was alone, then sat down on the bench. She didn't touch the keys, that would be overstepping, but she positioned her hands above them, feeling the familiar spacing. Her fingers curved naturally, muscle memory from long ago still present in her hands. "I thought I might find you in here," a voice said from the doorway. Rose jumped up from the bench, her cheeks flushing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, I was just about to polish it." The older maintenance supervisor waved away her apology with a kind smile. "No need to be sorry. I've seen how you look at that piano." "You play?" Rose busied herself with her dusting cloth. "A lifetime ago," she said softly. "Back in Spain before everything changed." Mr. Chen nodded without pressing further. After working alongside Rose for over a decade, he knew she rarely spoke about her past. "Well, they're bringing in a new one for the gala tomorrow. This one's being moved to storage. Something about a stuck key and the sound not being perfect enough for their fancy performer." "A shame to store such a beautiful instrument," Rose said, running her cloth gently across the glossy surface one last time. "Life's full of waste when you've got money to burn," Mr. Chen replied with a shrug. "Breakfast trays need clearing on the 3rd floor when you're done here." After he left, Rose returned to her work, humming softly to herself. The tune was one her grandmother had taught her, a folk melody from their small village outside Valencia. As she worked, her mind drifted back to the small stone house with its red-tiled roof where her family had lived for generations. Her grandmother's piano had been nothing like this grand instrument. It was an old upright with yellowed keys and a slightly warped cabinet from the humidity. But to young Rose, it had been magical. She could still picture her grandmother's hands, wrinkled and strong from years of farm work, yet somehow delicate and precise when they touched those keys. "Music is the language of the soul," her grandmother would say. "When words fail, music speaks." Rose had been just 6 when her grandmother began teaching her to play. By 8, she could reproduce any melody she heard. By 12, she was playing Chopin and Bach, her small fingers stretching to reach the complex chords. The village priest who had studied music in Madrid in his youth had been astonished by her natural talent. "This child is a gift," he had told her parents. "She must be trained properly." And for a while it seemed her life would follow that bright musical path. A scholarship to a prestigious music academy in Madrid. Professors who spoke of concert halls and recordings. Her parents' proud faces when she performed at her first recital, wearing a borrowed dress that her mother had carefully altered to fit her thin frame. Rose sighed as she moved on to cleaning the massive windows that lined the ballroom's far wall. Those memories belonged to a different life, one that had slipped away so suddenly she sometimes wondered if she had dreamed it all. Her father's heart attack when she was 16 had changed everything. With her mother already working 2 jobs, Rose had left the academy to help support the family. Then came the economic downturn that ravaged their region, her hasty marriage to a man who promised a better life in America, and the painful years that followed. By the time she found herself alone in New York with no money, no connections, and barely enough English to get by, the piano had become a distant memory. Survival had taken center stage in the symphony of her life. The job at the Grand Metropolitan had been a blessing 15 years ago. Steady work, decent pay, and managers who didn't ask too many questions about paperwork. Rose had built a simple life for herself, a small apartment in Queens, enough money to send home to her aging mother, and the quiet dignity of independence. "You missed a spot," a voice said. Startling Rose from her thoughts, she turned to find Lisa, one of the younger cleaning staff, pointing at a smudge on the window. At 24, Lisa approached her work with the temporary attitude of someone who saw it as a stepping stone to something better. "Thanks," Rose said, wiping away the mark with her cloth. "I don't know how you do these big rooms by yourself," Lisa said, leaning against her mop. "So much space, so much stuff to clean." Rose shrugged. "You get used to it. I like the quiet. Well, it won't be quiet tomorrow night. The manager's going crazy about this charity thing. All these rich people paying $10,000 a plate to feel good about themselves." Lisa rolled her eyes. "And guess who has to work overtime to make sure everything's perfect?" "It's good for the hotel," Rose said diplomatically. "And good for the charities, too. Always looking on the bright side, aren't you?" Lisa smiled. "Oh, I almost forgot. Mrs. Reynolds wants all the bathrooms on this floor stocked with those fancy hand towels." "The embroidered ones," Rose nodded. "I'll take care of it after lunch." As Lisa left, Rose returned to her window cleaning, but her mind kept drifting back to the piano. It had been so long since she'd played. Occasionally, she would press her fingers against the kitchen table, moving them as if playing a silent sonata. But the weight of real keys, the resonance of true notes, these sensations had faded from her fingertips. There had been a time, just after she'd started working at the hotel, when she'd sometimes slip into the ballroom during her lunch break. If no events were scheduled, and if the room was empty, she would allow herself 5 minutes at the piano. Just 5 minutes to remember, to feel connected to that other Rose, the one who might have performed in places like this rather than cleaning them. But then one day a manager had walked in unexpectedly. He hadn't been unkind exactly, but his surprise and the awkwardness of the moment had been enough. "The instruments are for guests and performers only," he'd explained, not meeting her eyes. Rose had nodded, apologized, and never returned to the piano during her breaks again. As she finished the windows and moved on to polishing the brass fixtures, Rose noticed the framed photographs lining the hallway outside the ballroom. They showcased famous performers who had appeared at the hotel over the years, renowned pianists with serious expressions, violinists caught in moments of passionate performance, celebrated opera singers with their mouths open in frozen song. She paused in front of a photo of an elderly pianist, his gnarled hands suspended above the keys of the same grand piano she had just dusted. His face was tilted upward, eyes closed in concentration or perhaps ecstasy. According to the small plaque beneath the photo, he had been playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, her grandmother's favorite piece and the last one Rose had mastered before leaving the academy. "That was quite a night," said a passing waiter, noticing Rose studying the photograph. "Standing ovation. 7 encores. The old man played until nearly 2 in the morning and no one wanted to leave." Rose nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She remembered how that particular piece felt under her fingers. The challenging runs, the delicate balance between technical precision and emotional expression. Her grandmother had called it music that makes the soul take flight. How strange life was, Rose thought as she resumed her work. Here she was, cleaning the very space where that music had soared, touching the same piano keys but with a dust cloth rather than with artistic purpose. Yet somehow she didn't feel bitter. There was dignity in all forms of work, her mother had always said, and Rose found satisfaction in transforming chaotic, messy spaces into ordered beauty. Perhaps it wasn't so different from what musicians did, creating harmony from potential discord. As the morning progressed and the hotel came fully to life around her, Rose continued her careful, methodical work. To the guests now streaming through the lobby, she was largely invisible, part of the hotel's background like the wallpaper or the potted plants. But inside her mind, Chopin's melodies still played, Her fingers still remembered, and the little girl from Valencia, who once made a piano sing, had never completely disappeared. The day of the charity gala arrived with a flurry of activity. Throughout the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, Rose had been at work since 4 a.m, making sure every surface gleamed and every corner was spotless. The ballroom had been transformed overnight. Dozens of round tables draped in cream-colored linens filled the space, each one adorned with elaborate floral centerpieces. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandeliers, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the tablecloths. By mid-afternoon, Rose's regular shift had ended, but she had agreed to stay on to help with last-minute preparations. The hotel was always short-staffed during big events, and the extra hours meant a little more in her next paycheck. She was carefully arranging fresh hand towels in the ladies' restroom when she heard raised voices from the hallway outside. "What do you mean he's not coming? The gala starts in 3 hours. The sharp voice belonged to Mrs. Reynolds, the hotel's event coordinator, a tall woman with perfectly styled blonde hair who always wore high heels that clicked aggressively against the marble floors. Rose peeked out to see Mrs. Reynolds pacing back and forth, her cell phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing dramatically. 2 younger staff members stood nearby, looking uncomfortable. "Food poisoning? Are you absolutely certain he can't perform? This is completely unacceptable." Mrs. Reynolds ended the call with an angry jab at her phone screen. "Wonderful. Just wonderful. Our pianist has apparently eaten some bad shellfish and is now, as he so colorfully described it, praying to the porcelain god." One of the young staff members, a man Rose recognized as Tyler from the catering department, suppressed a smile. "Can't you find a replacement? There must be other pianists in the city." Mrs. Reynolds glared at him. "On 3 hours' notice? For an event hosting the mayor, 2 state senators, and half the city's wealthiest donors? Please enlighten me with your vast expertise in booking world-class musicians on 0 notice." The other staff member, a young woman with short black hair whose name tag read Diane, spoke up hesitantly. "What about recorded music? We have the sound system. Recorded music?" Mrs. Reynolds looked as if Diane had suggested serving fast food at the gala. "This is a $5,000 per plate charity event, not your cousin's backyard wedding." Rose quietly continued her work, trying to become invisible as she always did when management was upset. She slipped past the group, pushing her cart toward the supply closet at the end of the hall. "Hey, wait a second." Tyler's voice stopped her. "What about her?" Rose froze, turning slowly to find all 3 of them staring at her. "The cleaning lady?" Mrs. Reynolds said, raising a perfectly shaped eyebrow. Tyler grinned, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Why not? We need someone to sit at the piano, right? Just for appearance's sake until you figure something out. The guests will be arriving soon and an empty stage looks bad." "Don't be ridiculous," Mrs. Reynolds said, but Rose could see she was actually considering it. "Think about it," Tyler continued, warming to his idea. "The piano's just a prop at this point. We need the space to look ready. Put her in one of the spare server uniforms. Have her pretend to adjust the piano or something when people arrive. It buys you time to figure out a real solution." Rose felt her cheeks growing hot. They were talking about her as if she weren't standing right there, as if she were just another piece of furniture to be arranged. "I really should finish my work," she said quietly. "Oh, come on," Tyler said, taking a step toward her. "Help us out here. It's just for show." Mrs. Reynolds was checking her watch, her face tight with stress. "We need something. Anything to avoid an empty stage when the mayor arrives. Diane, take her to find a suitable uniform. Something black that fits well enough. Tyler, call every entertainment agency in your contacts. I'll speak with the hotel manager about offering a significant bonus for a last-minute performer." Before Rose could protest further, Diane had taken her by the elbow and was guiding her away from her cleaning cart. "Come on, we'll find something in the staff room. It's just for a little while." Rose followed reluctantly, her stomach knotting with anxiety. She didn't like being the center of attention, especially not like this. For 15 years, she had done her job quietly and efficiently, blending into the background of the hotel's daily life. Now suddenly she was being thrust onto a stage in front of the city's elite. "I don't think this is a good idea," she said as Diane rummaged through a rack of spare uniforms in the staff changing room. "It's just for show," Diane repeated, pulling out a black jacket and matching pants. "You don't actually have to play or anything. Just sit there and look Pianisty. Pianisty? Despite her discomfort, Rose couldn't help but smile at the made-up word. Diane grinned back. You know what I mean. Just look serious and maybe pretend to adjust the music stand or check the pedals. Basic time-filling stuff until Mrs. Reynolds figures out what to do. Rose took the clothes Diane offered her, still uncertain. I've never done anything like this before. None of us has, Diane said with a shrug. First time for everything. And hey, it's got to be easier than scrubbing toilets, right? 20 minutes later, Rose stood awkwardly in the staff room, dressed in the black uniform that was a little too loose in some places and a little too tight in others. Diane had insisted on pinning up her hair and had even applied a touch of lipstick to complete the look. Perfect, Diane said, stepping back to admire her work. You look like you belong on that stage. Rose doubted that very much. She caught sight of her reflection in the mirror and hardly recognized herself. The woman staring back at her looked nervous and out of place, like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. When they returned to the ballroom, they found it buzzing with activity. Waitstaff in crisp uniforms were making final adjustments to table settings. Florists were adding last touches to the elaborate arrangements. And on the small stage at the front of the room, the grand piano gleamed under the spotlight. Mrs. Reynolds was speaking with a small group of staff near the stage. When she saw Rose, she frowned slightly. Well, it will have to do. The mayor's assistant just called. They're running early. Guests will start arriving in 15 minutes. She turned to Rose. Just sit at the piano and look busy. Don't touch the keys, we don't want any noise. When the real entertainment arrives, you'll be discreetly replaced. Tyler appeared beside Mrs. Reynolds, a smirk playing on his lips. No replacement yet, but I had an even better idea. He lowered his voice, though not enough that Rose couldn't hear him. What if we let her play? Mrs. Reynolds stared at him. Are you drunk? No, listen, Tyler said, his eyes gleaming with suppressed laughter. It would be hilarious. The cleaning lady playing for the mayor. Maybe she'll bang out chopsticks or something. It would be a funny distraction. And then when she inevitably embarrasses herself, you can rush in and apologize, saying the real pianist is caught in traffic. The guests will be so relieved when the professional arrives that they'll forget all about the delay. That's cruel. Tyler, Diane said, glancing sympathetically at Rose. It's just a joke, Tyler insisted. Like those TV shows where they put regular people in over their heads and film the reactions. Everyone ends up laughing about it. Rose stood very still, her hands clasped in front of her. She should say something, walk away, refuse to be part of their joke. But years of making herself small, of avoiding conflict, kept her silent. Mrs. Reynolds was checking her phone again, her face tight with stress. I don't care what happens as long as we have something on that stage when the mayor walks in. The hotel manager is breathing down my neck about this. She looked up at Rose. Just do as you're told and you'll get an extra day's pay. As Mrs. Reynolds hurried off to deal with another crisis, Tyler stepped closer to Rose. So can you play anything at all? Mary Had a Little Lamb, maybe? Or is Twinkle, Twinkle more your speed? He was trying to keep his voice casual, but Rose could hear the mockery underneath. I know a few songs, she said quietly. Tyler laughed. Perfect. This is going to be priceless. Just remember to really sell it. Act like you think you're good. That'll make it even funnier when people realize what's happening. Rose felt something shift inside her, a small, hard knot of anger forming in her chest. For 15 years, she had cleaned up after people like Tyler, picked up their discarded napkins, wiped away their spilled drinks, scrubbed their muddy footprints from the lobby floor. She had done it all without complaint, with dignity and care. And now she was nothing more than a punchline in their joke. You'd better get up there, Diane said, gentler than Tyler but still clearly uncomfortable with the situation. People are starting to arrive. Rose took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. The spotlight felt hot and foreign on her skin. The piano bench was cool and smooth beneath her as she sat down. From this position, she could see the main doors where elegantly dressed guests were beginning to filter in, handing their invitations to the doormen, accepting glasses of champagne from passing servers. For a moment, Rose considered simply sitting there as instructed, pretending to adjust the music stand until Mrs. Reynolds found a solution. It would be easier, safer. But then she caught sight of Tyler standing near the stage with two other young staff members. They were watching her with barely concealed amusement, phones partially hidden in their hands, ready to capture her humiliation for their later entertainment. Rose straightened her back. She had spent so many years being invisible. Perhaps it was time just once to be seen. Rose sat at the grand piano, feeling every eye in the room on her. The ballroom had filled quickly with guests in expensive evening wear. Women draped in silk and jewels, men in tailored tuxedos. They mingled and chatted, occasionally glancing toward the stage with mild curiosity. A few feet away, Tyler and his friends hovered, phones partially hidden but clearly aimed in her direction. Mrs. Reynolds was at the entrance greeting the mayor and his wife, her professional smile firmly in place despite the panic Rose knew she must be feeling inside. No replacement pianist had appeared. No solution had presented itself. And now Rose sat exposed under the spotlight, an imposter in borrowed clothes about to become the evening's unintended entertainment. Her hands rested in her lap, trembling slightly. 15 years had passed since she'd last performed for an audience. 15 years since her fingers had danced across piano keys with purpose rather than just dusting them. What if she had forgotten everything? What if her hands refused to remember? A waiter passed by the edge of the stage carrying a tray of champagne flutes. He gave her a curious look, clearly wondering why the cleaning lady was sitting at the piano. Rose recognized him, Paolo from the kitchen staff who sometimes shared his homemade cookies with the cleaning crew during break time. He raised an eyebrow at her and she gave him a small nervous smile in return. "Good luck," he whispered before continuing on his route. Rose glanced down at the gleaming keys before her. This wasn't the old piano from the ballroom that she had secretly played during lunch breaks years ago. This was a brand new concert grand, brought in specially for the event. Its keys looked like perfect white and black teeth waiting for her touch. She placed her hands above the keys, not yet touching them. From the corner of her eye, she could see Tyler nudge his friend and nod in her direction. They were waiting for her to embarrass herself, waiting to laugh at the cleaning lady who dared to pretend she belonged in their world. Rose took a deep breath and closed her eyes. In her mind, she was back in her grandmother's small stone house in Valencia. The windows were open to catch the afternoon breeze, carrying with it the scent of orange blossoms from the grove behind their home. Her grandmother sat beside her on the bench of their old upright piano, her weathered hands guiding Rose's smaller ones. "Music comes from here," her grandmother would say, placing a hand over her heart. "The piano is just the instrument that lets it out." Rose opened her eyes and placed her fingers on the keys. The cool ivory felt like greeting an old friend. Without thinking about it too deeply, she began to play. She started with something simple, a Bach minuet she had learned as a child. The notes came hesitantly at first, her fingers remembering the way step by step. It was like walking a path she had once known by heart, but had not traveled in many years. Each measure brought more certainty, more confidence. The soft, precise notes drifted through the ballroom. A few nearby conversations paused. Someone looked up from their champagne, curious about the unexpected music. Rose kept her eyes on the keys, too afraid to look up and see the reactions. Instead, she focused on the feeling of the music flowing from her fingers, awakening something long dormant inside her. As the last notes of the Bach piece faded, she could have stopped. She had fulfilled what was asked of her, to occupy the piano until a replacement arrived. No one could mock her now. She had proven she could play, even if it was just a simple student piece. But something had been unlocked inside Rose. A door she had firmly shut 15 years ago was now cracked open, and music was pouring through. Without pause, her fingers found the opening notes of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, the last piece she had mastered before leaving the academy. Her grandmother's favorite. The complex opening chords resonated through the grand piano with a richness that surprised even Rose. This instrument responded to her touch differently than any she had played before, offering its voice fully to her command. The music built slowly, like a story being told note by note. Tyler's smirk had faded. His phone now hung limply at his side as he stared at Rose with disbelief. Nearby, a woman in a red evening gown touched her companion's arm, nodding toward the stage with raised eyebrows. More conversations halted as the music grew in intensity and complexity. Rose was barely aware of any of this. She had entered that special place that exists only for musicians, where time becomes fluid and measured only by the rhythm of the piece, where nothing exists beyond the conversation between player and instrument. Her body swayed slightly with the music. her face reflecting the changing emotions of the composition, the technical challenges of the piece. The runs and arpeggios that had once required hours of practice now flowed from her fingers as naturally as breathing. It was as if her hands had never forgotten, had been waiting all these years to speak this language again. Mrs. Reynolds stood frozen near the entrance, her mouth slightly open as she watched Rose transform before her eyes. The mayor and his wife had stopped to listen, their expressions shifting from polite interest to genuine surprise as the music grew more complex and passionate. As Rose reached the piece's dramatic middle section, the entire ballroom had fallen silent. Waiters stood with trays suspended mid-route. Guests turned in their seats or stepped closer to the stage. Even the kitchen staff had paused at the service doors, listening to the unexpected concert unfolding in the ballroom. Paolo, the waiter who had wished her luck, now stood at the edge of the stage grinning broadly. He caught her eye for a moment and gave her a thumbs up. Rose felt a smile tug at her lips as her fingers continued their dance across the keys. The piece built toward its powerful conclusion, Rose's hands flying across the keyboard with precision and emotion. This was why she had fallen in love with music as a child. This ability to express what words could never capture, to speak directly to the heart without language. Every hour of practice, every sacrifice, every dream she had set aside, it was all there in the music. When the final chord sounded, resonating through the silent ballroom, Rose sat motionless, her hands still hovering above the keys. For a moment there was complete silence. Then the applause began. It started slowly, a few scattered claps from those who recovered first from their surprise. Then it swelled, growing to fill the ballroom with thunderous appreciation. Rose finally looked up, blinking in the spotlight, to see the entire room on their feet. The mayor was clapping enthusiastically. Mrs. Reynolds looked stunned but was applauding along with everyone else. Even Tyler stood open-mouthed, his phone now recording her triumph rather than her expected humiliation. An older gentleman in the front row turned to his companion and said something Rose couldn't hear over the applause, but she could read his lips clearly enough. Extraordinary. Rose felt tears prickling at her eyes. How long had it been since anyone had used that word to describe her? How long since she had felt like more than just a pair of hands that cleaned floors and emptied trash bins? As the applause continued, Mrs. Reynolds composed herself and approached the stage. Rose prepared to stand, to relinquish her place to whatever professional performer might have finally arrived. Instead, Mrs. Reynolds leaned close and whispered urgently, "Do you know any more pieces?" Rose nodded, still somewhat dazed by the response. "Our pianist canceled," Mrs. Reynolds continued, her voice tight with controlled desperation. Would you be willing to play for the evening? We'll pay you, of course." Rose looked out at the crowd, still applauding, still watching her with expressions ranging from delight to disbelief. Her gaze landed on Paolo, who was grinning and pantomiming, "Keep going," with his hands. Then she saw Tyler and his friends, their earlier mockery replaced by embarrassment and shock. For a moment she savored their discomfort, a small human part of her enjoying this reversal. But then she let it go. This moment wasn't about them. It was about music, about rediscovering a part of herself she had thought was lost forever. "Yes," Rose said simply. "I know many more pieces." Mrs. Reynolds sagged with relief. "Thank you, just keep playing." "Whatever you like." As Mrs. Reynolds hurried back to her duties, Rose turned again to the piano. The applause was fading now, the crowd settling back into their seats, waiting to see what would happen next. Rose closed her eyes briefly, considering what to play. Her mind was filled suddenly with possibilities. All the music she had loved, had studied, had dreamed of performing one day. Opening her eyes, she smiled at the audience and began to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, its gentle, flowing melody washing over the hushed ballroom. As she played, Rose felt something shift inside her, as if pieces of herself that had been scattered over the years were slowly finding their way back home. She was still Rose Lopez, the woman who cleaned hotel rooms and scrubbed floors. But she was also Rose Lopez, the pianist who could make a room full of strangers fall silent with the beauty of her music. Both were true. Both were her. The charity gala continued, but it was no longer the same event. What had been planned as a standard evening of polite conversation, fundraising speeches, and background music had transformed into something unexpected, a concert that had the entire room captivated. Rose moved from Beethoven to Schubert, then to a spirited piece by Liszt that showcased her technical skill. With each piece she felt more of herself returning, as if she were slowly waking up after a very long sleep. During a brief pause between compositions, Rose noticed a tall, distinguished-looking gentleman making his way toward the stage. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. As he approached, Mrs. Reynolds hurried to intercept him, her face a mixture of anxiety and apology. "Dr. Harrison," Rose heard her say, "I'm so terribly sorry about the confusion with the entertainment. We had a last-minute cancellation and—" The man waved away her explanation. "No apologies necessary. This is the most extraordinary thing I've heard in years." He gestured toward Rose. "May I speak with her?" Mrs. Reynolds glanced nervously at Rose, then back at the man. "Of course, Dr. Harrison." She led him to the side of the stage where Rose was taking a short break, sipping from a glass of water that Paolo had thoughtfully brought her. "Rose, this is Dr. William Harrison. He's the director of the Westridge Music Conservatory and one of our most important donors." Mrs. Reynolds's tone made it clear this was someone to be respected. "Dr. Harrison would like to speak with you." Rose stood up quickly, suddenly conscious again of her borrowed clothes and her position as an employee rather than a performer. "It's nice to meet you, sir." "The pleasure is entirely mine," Dr. Harrison said, his voice warm and his eyes curious. "Your playing is remarkable. Where did you study?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Rose hesitated, aware of Mrs. Reynolds watching her closely. "The Royal Conservatory in Madrid," she finally said. "A long time ago." Dr. Harrison's eyebrows rose. "Under Maestro Cortez by any chance?" Rose nodded, surprised. "Yes, for my last 2 years there." "Fascinating. His approach to Chopin is unmistakable in your playing, that balance of technical precision and emotional expressiveness." He studied her with open curiosity. "May I ask why you're playing at this event?" "I was under the impression that Anton Borowski was scheduled to perform tonight." Before Rose could answer, Mrs. Reynolds jumped in. "As I mentioned, we had a last-minute cancellation." Rose graciously stepped in to help us. She laughed nervously. "She works for the hotel." "As the house pianist?" Dr. Harrison asked. Mrs. Reynolds' smile faltered. "No, she's on our cleaning staff." Dr. Harrison's expression didn't change, but he turned his full attention back to Rose. "How extraordinary. And how long have you been working here?" 15 years, Rose said quietly. "And playing the piano?" "Since I was 6. But I haven't performed in a very long time." By now, a small group of guests had gathered nearby, listening to their conversation with undisguised interest. Among them was the mayor, and a woman Rose recognized from photographs as the head of the city's arts council. "Would you mind telling us your story?" Dr. Harrison asked. "I think everyone here is quite curious." Rose glanced around at the expectant faces. She had spent so many years avoiding attention, making herself invisible. Now all these people whose offices and bathrooms and hotel rooms she had cleaned, were waiting to hear about her life. It was disorienting, but there was something liberating about it too. "There isn't much to tell," she began. "I grew up in a small village outside Valencia in Spain. My grandmother taught me to play on our old piano. When I was 12, I got a scholarship to study in Madrid." She paused, memories flooding back. "I was on track to become a concert pianist. My teacher said I had potential." "Clearly they were right," Dr. Harrison said with a smile. Rose shook her head slightly. "My father died when I was 16. Heart attack. My mother was working 2 jobs already, and I had 3 younger siblings. I left the conservatory to help support my family." The words came easier now, the story she had kept inside for so long finally finding its way out. "Later I came to America hoping for a better life. Things didn't go as planned. I needed work and the hotel hired me. That was 15 years ago." The mayor's wife stepped forward. "And all this time you've been cleaning the hotel while having this extraordinary talent?" Rose nodded. "The hotel has been good to me. The work is honest. It pays my bills and lets me send money to my mother back home." "But didn't anyone here know you could play like this?" the Arts Council director asked, looking pointedly at Mrs. Reynolds. Mrs. Reynolds shook her head, seeming genuinely shocked. "We had no idea. I never mentioned it," Rose said. "It was from another life. And no one ever asked." There was an uncomfortable silence as the implications of her words sank in. How many people had passed Rose in the hallways, seeing only a cleaning woman, never imagining she had another identity, another gift. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat. Would you continue playing for us? Perhaps something Spanish from your homeland? Rose smiled, grateful for his kindness. I know just the piece. As she returned to the piano, she saw Tyler standing at the back of the crowd. His earlier mockery had been replaced by something that looked almost like shame. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a small, apologetic nod. Rose settled back at the piano and began to play de Fala's Ritual Fire Dance, a piece that captured the passion and spirit of Spain. Her fingers flew over the keys with newfound confidence, the music building in intensity as it progressed. She poured her heart into the performance, not just her technical skill, but all the emotions she'd kept contained for so many years. Joy, sorrow, longing, pride, they all found their voice through the music. When she finished, the applause was even more enthusiastic than before. People were standing calling out, "Bravo!" and "Encore." Rose felt tears welling in her eyes again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. They were tears of release, of recognition, of return. As the evening continued, Rose played piece after piece, drawing from her extensive classical repertoire. Between selections, guests approached the piano to speak with her, asking about her favorite composers or requesting particular pieces. People who had never looked twice at her while she vacuumed the lobby or changed the towels in their suites now listened to her with rapt attention, treating her with respect and admiration. Mrs. Reynolds had recovered from her initial shock and was now proudly telling anyone who would listen that Rose worked at our hotel, as if her talent somehow reflected well on the establishment's management. The mayor made a point of having his photograph taken with Rose at the piano, promising to send her a signed copy. During a short break, Paolo appeared at her side with a plate of food from the gala dinner, dishes Rose would normally only see as leftovers to be cleared away. "You should eat something," he said. "You've been playing for hours." Rose realized he was right. She had been so caught up in the music and the incredible turn of events that she hadn't noticed the time passing. "Thank you, Paolo." She accepted the plate gratefully, for this and for being kind to me before anyone knew. He grinned and shrugged. "You were always nice to us kitchen staff. Never looked down on us like some of the others do." He nodded toward the crowd. "Pretty crazy how things change in one night, huh?" "Very crazy," Rose agreed, taking a bite of the delicious food. As she ate, Dr. Harrison approached again, this time accompanied by a younger woman with a notebook. "Rose, I hope I'm not interrupting your dinner," he said. "This is Nancy Chen from the Symphony Board. She has a proposition for you if you're willing to hear it." Nancy stepped forward, her expression warm and professional. "Your playing is extraordinary, Ms. Lopez. We have a special concert series coming up next month, Hidden Talents, featuring performers with unique stories and backgrounds. We would be honored if you would consider being our featured pianist for opening night." Rose nearly choked on her food. "Me perform at the Symphony Hall?" "With the full orchestra, if you're comfortable with that. We could feature you performing a concerto of your choice." Nancy handed Rose a business card. "Please think about it. It would be a paid performance, of course." As Nancy and Dr. Harrison moved away to give her time to consider, Rose sat in stunned silence. Symphony Hall, a paid performance, a concerto with full orchestra. These were dreams she had abandoned so long ago that she had almost forgotten they had ever existed. She looked down at her hands that had spent the past 15 years cleaning toilets, scrubbing floors, and dusting furniture. Hands that still remembered every note of the music she had once lived for. Hands that had two lives, just as she did. From across the room, she caught Mr. Chen's eye. The kind maintenance supervisor was standing near the service entrance, watching the proceedings with an expression of wonder and delight. He gave her a small bow of recognition, one artist acknowledging another. Rose smiled and returned the gesture. Then she stood up, straightened her borrowed clothes, and walked back to the piano. There was still music waiting to be played, still parts of herself waiting to be rediscovered. The night was far from over. 3 weeks after the charity gala, Rose stood nervously in the wings of Symphony Hall, hardly believing she was there. The past 21 days had been a whirlwind that had turned her quiet, predictable life completely upside down. The morning after the gala, she had arrived at the hotel for her regular shift, mop and bucket in hand, only to be called to the manager's office. She had gone with a knot in her stomach. wondering if somehow she had broken rules by playing at the event, despite being asked to do so. Instead, she found the hotel manager, Mr. Phillips, standing to greet her with a respect she had never seen from him before. "Rose, please sit down," he had said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "First, I want to apologize." "Apologize?" Rose had repeated, confused. "Yes." Mr. Phillips had looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I've been the manager here for 12 years. That means for 12 years we've had an extraordinary concert pianist cleaning our floors, and none of us ever knew or thought to ask." Rose had shifted in her chair, unused to being the focus of such attention from management. "It's fine, Mr. Phillips, I never mentioned it. Still, it makes me wonder what talents our other staff might be hiding." He had cleared his throat and continued. "The reason I called you in is that I've received 3 phone calls about you this morning. One from Dr. Harrison at the conservatory, one from the symphony, and one from the mayor himself." Rose had felt her cheeks grow warm. "They all say the same thing, that you have an extraordinary gift. And now I have a proposition for you." Mr. Phillips had leaned forward. "The hotel would like to offer you a new position as our resident pianist." "Resident pianist?" Rose had echoed. "Yes. Playing in the main restaurant during dinner hours, special events, Sunday brunches. It would be the same salary as your current position to start, but with better hours. No more 4 a.m. shifts. And of course, tips from the guests. What do you think?" Rose had been speechless. After a moment, she had managed to ask, "And what about my cleaning duties?" Mr. Phillips had smiled. "I think your hands have more important work to do now." That conversation had been just the beginning. Dr. Harrison had invited her to visit the conservatory, where she met students and faculty who treated her like a colleague rather than a curiosity. The symphony offer had become real, with rehearsals scheduled and publicity photos taken. Local newspapers had picked up her story, the cleaning lady with a concert pianist's soul, and suddenly people were stopping her on the street, recognizing her from the articles. Now, as she peeked out at the packed concert hall from backstage, Rose felt a flutter of panic. What if she couldn't do this? What if the gala had been a fluke, a moment of magic that couldn't be repeated? What if, nervous, she turned to find an older gentleman in a tuxedo standing beside her. He was one of the violinists from the orchestra, his instrument tucked under his arm. Terrified, Rose admitted. He smiled. "I've been playing with this orchestra for 40 years and I still get butterflies before every performance." He nodded toward the audience. "See all those people? They're here because they love music. They want you to succeed. They're on your side before you play a single note." Rose took a deep breath. "Thank you. That helps. 5 minutes, Ms. Lopez," a stagehand called softly. The violinist gave her an encouraging nod and moved away to take his place with the orchestra. Rose smoothed down the front of her new dress, a simple but elegant black gown that the symphony had provided for her. It fit perfectly, unlike the borrowed uniform from the gala night. Her hair was styled simply, and she wore only a touch of makeup. She had insisted on keeping things understated. The music should be the focus, she had told the wardrobe coordinator. From the stage came the sound of the orchestra tuning up, the familiar cacophony that precedes harmony. Rose closed her eyes and did what her grandmother had taught her so many years ago. She took 3 deep breaths and pictured the music in her mind, feeling it flow from her heart to her fingertips. When she opened her eyes, she saw Paolo and Mr. Chen standing a few feet away, dressed in their Sunday best. They had both asked for the night off to attend her concert. Behind them were Diane and, surprisingly, Tyler, who had apologized profusely for his behavior at the gala. Rose had forgiven him. She had better things to focus on than old hurts. "You're going to be amazing," Paolo said, giving her a thumbs up. "We're all so proud of you," Mr. Chen added. The stagehand reappeared. "It's time, Ms. Lopez." Rose nodded and took another deep breath. As she stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinded her. The audience applauded as she made her way to the grand piano at the center of the stage. She saw Dr. Harrison in the front row smiling encouragingly. Next to him sat a special guest, Rose's mother, flown in from Spain courtesy of the Symphony Board, experiencing her daughter's triumph firsthand for the first time. Rose sat at the piano and adjusted the bench slightly. She looked up at the conductor, who nodded to her with respect. They had rehearsed the Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto No. 1 extensively over the past weeks, and he had treated her as an equal, a fellow artist from the very first note. As the orchestra began the famous opening chords, Rose felt a calm certainty settle over her. This was where she belonged, not because playing at Symphony Hall was somehow better or more important than cleaning at the Grand Metropolitan, but because this was the gift she had to offer the world. Her hands joined the orchestra, finding the keys with confidence and precision. As she played, images from her life flowed through her mind, her grandmother's weathered hands guiding hers on their old upright piano, her teachers at the conservatory nodding with approval, her father's proud face at her last student recital before his death, the long years of silence when her music lived only in her heart, and finally, the moment at the gala when she had decided to be seen. The concerto's challenging passages that had once seemed impossible now flowed naturally from her fingers. She and the orchestra moved together through the piece's emotional landscape, from thundering drama to delicate tenderness and back again. Rose felt herself becoming a conduit for something larger than herself, larger than any individual musician on that stage. Together they were bringing to life something beautiful that existed beyond words. When the final triumphant chord sounded, there was a moment of breathless silence before the hall erupted in applause. Rose stood slightly dazed as the audience rose to their feet. The sound was overwhelming. Hundreds of people clapping, cheering, some even wiping away tears. The conductor gestured for Rose to take a bow, which she did, still somewhat in disbelief that this was her life now. As she straightened, she caught sight of her mother in the front row, crying openly, her hands pressed together as if in prayer. The applause continued as the conductor handed Rose a bouquet of roses. She accepted them with a smile, then impulsively removed one and handed it to the concertmaster, acknowledging that this triumph belonged not just to her, but to all of them. Later, at the reception following the concert, Rose found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Critics were calling her debut remarkable and deeply moving. Students from the conservatory asked for her advice, as if she had always been a celebrated pianist rather than a woman who had, until recently, cleaned their practice rooms. How does it feel? A local reporter asked, notepad in hand. To go from being a cleaning lady to a celebrated pianist almost overnight? Rose considered the question carefully. I was never just a cleaning lady, she said finally. And I'm not just a pianist either. We're all more than our jobs or our talents. I think that's what my story is really about. Seeing people for who they are, not just what they do. The reporter nodded thoughtfully. And what's next for you? I'm starting a music program, Rose said, warming to the topic that had become her passion over the past weeks. For adults who had to give up their dreams like I did. People who think it's too late for them. The hotel has donated space and we have volunteers from the conservatory to teach. That's wonderful, the reporter said. And your own career? There's talk of a recording contract, a tour. Rose smiled. I'm taking it one day at a time. I spent 15 years without music in my life, at least without playing it. I'm not rushing anything now. As the evening wound down, Rose found herself standing near a window, taking a moment of quiet amid the celebration. She was tired but filled with a deep contentment she hadn't felt in years. Excuse me, Ms. Lopez? A young woman in a hotel uniform approached hesitantly. I just wanted to say that you were amazing tonight. I work in housekeeping at the Parkview Hotel, but I used to play violin before I had my kids and, well, your story made me think maybe I could start again. Rose reached out and squeezed the woman's hand. You absolutely can. Music is patient. It waits for us to return. As the woman walked away, Rose turned back to the window, looking out at the city lights. Her reflection stared back at her, no longer invisible, no longer silent, but fully herself at last. She had played a concert tonight, but her greatest performance had been surviving 15 years of hardship without losing her spirit, her kindness, or her ability to hope. The music had always been inside her, waiting for its moment to be heard again, and now, finally, the world was listening.